All right. Okay, good evening, everybody. For those of you that I don't know, my name is Joshua Sturgill. I'm a member here at the Cathedral, except when I lived in New Mexico since about 2001. And I met Archbishop Dmitri of Dallas, who we're going to be talking about this evening, on a few occasions. Got it? And so it was quite a privilege to be able to put together a talk based on his life. I had a great impression of him. A few of us, or maybe people watching at home, might remember when Bishop Basil, Archbishop Dmitri, and Bishop Isaiah of Dallas, the Greek Archbishop of Dallas, used to do a pan-Orthodox service, I think maybe 3 years in a row, and they would go between their cathedrals in Denver, Dallas, and Wichita and serve together. It was really kind of an historic moment, and they served beautifully. And I remember Bishop Dmitri one time saying to his congregation that he felt like Bishop Isaiah and Bishop Basil were of one mind with him, and he loved serving with them. So I also got to do a little bit of field work in preparing this because I interviewed people that knew Archbishop Dmitri personally and remembered him very fondly and delighted to tell stories about him. He's one of the most beloved bishops in recent times. So I'll wait for a couple more folks to come in. Hi. To speak about Archbishop Dmitri is to speak about a saint, one who is so close to us in time and culture that it leaves us without excuse for imitating him and becoming saints as well. If the ancient signs of sainthood, Orthodox doctrine, holiness of life, compassion, noetic prayer, and incorruption after death are still valid today, then Archbishop Dmitri is truly a saint. Recently, I was reading Lord Northbourne, who is a British writer. A lot of his essays focus on agriculture and the intersection between agriculture, the environment, and traditional Christianity. And he says that saints are like the flowers of a community. Just like flowers emerge from a whole plant. Flowers don't just simply appear, but they emerge from a whole plant. They come from within a plant and testify to its health and vitality. And flowers draw attention to the entire beauty, the architectural beauty, the branches and the leaves of the plant from which they emerge. And saints draw attention to the whole group of people from which they spring. So there are no mere saints. There are no saints in isolation. A saint is the gift that we offer to God and the gift that he offers to us. Saints are proof of our faith, but also proof of perseverance, asceticism, love, and humility. I thought that was a beautiful picture of Archbishop Dmitri because the plant from which that flower of sainthood emerged is right here in the Midwest, very close to us. The biographical details that are interesting and important on one level are easily found on Wikipedia. So I'm going to read a little bit of that, just so you know where I got my sources. There's not as much information on him as there probably will be as more and more people begin to talk about Archbishop Dmitri and his life. But he was born Robert Royster in Teague, Texas in 1923. He was raised in a Southern Baptist home, and at a young age, he and his sister, who I believe was a few years older than he, they decided they wanted to know more about the early church. And so he and his sister studied the scripture, and they became convinced that the church as described in the Bible was very different from the church that they had grown up in. And one story was told to me that they saw a procession at the Greek Orthodox Church in Dallas and were very drawn to it, very intrigued. So they read a little bit about it, and they went and visited a Greek Orthodox service, which of course they didn't understand at that time. All the services were in native languages around the U.S., and the service was entirely in Greek, but they were warmly received there. And Bishop Dmitri said about searching for the early church, he said, "We began to look around. We visited a number of churches. We had a big book called the Book of World Religions or something like that, in which all religions and denominations were described, rather briefly, but at the same time rather completely. There was a description of the Eastern Orthodox Church in that book. It described the Orthodox Church as being the mother of all Christian churches. We began to look at the New Testament rather carefully and pick out portions that reflected in some way what the church was in the apostolic age. Really, when you put it together, there is quite a lot of information. It isn't as skimpy or sketchy a description as it might appear at first glance." After attending the Orthros and Divine Liturgy service at, he said, age 15, he was quoted as saying, "We knew from that moment we would probably not go anywhere else. It was evident that something really took place, that the Holy Spirit was really transforming the bread and the wine at that church." So Archbishop Dmitri, at this time, Robert and his sister formally began their inquiry into Orthodoxy in 1939, which really is amazing. That's not a time and place that you think of as converts coming to the church. He joined the church under the blessing of Archbishop Athenagoras, who later became the Patriarch of Constantinople, which is very interesting. And they were received into the church in 1941 at Holy Trinity Greek Orthodox Church in Dallas. So that's what you can find on Wikipedia and some simple biographical sketches of him. But the real joy of preparing this talk was, like I said, the people that I got to talk to and who told me stories that Archbishop Dmitri had told them or experiences that they had of him serving the liturgy, personal conversations. And so I tried to order these. I had a few one-on-one conversations, but a lot of the talks that I had with people were in a big group. In fact, last weekend I was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I was speaking to the priest there and to one other lady, and as soon as people heard, I was selling books for Eighth Day, and as soon as people heard that we were talking about Archbishop Dmitri, a small crowd gathered, and they all started telling stories and correcting each other's stories and adding other stories and remembering things that they had forgotten. So I've done my best to organize this, but I also like the idea that this is very, very anecdotal. And I think that's how the stories of saints' lives really should come to us, as beginning in the personal testimonies of people who were affected and dazzled in some sense by the holiness of the saint that they are remembering. So these are all things that I was told by the parishioners, and I've tried to simplify and not put too many details because I don't want to get anything wrong. But anybody out there who remembers Archbishop Dmitri and is listening to this, if I get a detail wrong, please forgive me. In 1942, the Archbishop Dmitri, Robert, enlisted and joined the army, and he was gifted with languages. He became a linguist, he studied Japanese, and he was an assistant to General MacArthur. And I was told that MacArthur gave Robert, Archbishop Dmitri, the task of interrogating Japanese prisoners. And as you might imagine, MacArthur told him he was to use, quote, any means necessary to get information out of them, including violence and coercion. But as a Christian, Robert Royer felt that he could not force anyone or use violence. And so instead he would pray for the prisoners, for these Japanese prisoners, before he would go in and interrogate them. And they always gave him the information that he needed without him having to resort to any extreme measures. He prayed for cooperation, but he also prayed for the protection of these people, that they would not be harmed. And God blessed that prayer for nonviolence. He was a gifted linguist, so not just fluent in Japanese, but he got a degree in Spanish and taught Spanish literature at SMU. He knew Greek, he knew a smattering of Chinese and a few other languages, and I'm told he would often say, "Oh, I don't know such and such a language," and then later on he would be heard having a conversation in that language with somebody in the congregation who was visiting. So I think he was the exarch of Mexico for a while because of his Spanish language ability, and he often said that he wished the Orthodox would do more to reach out to the African American community and the Hispanic community, and I think he did everything that he could in his time and place to kind of to open the doors of Orthodoxy to ethnic groups, linguistic groups that might not have had a connection. After the war, Archbishop Dmitri was ordained, and he served in Dallas, and then he was made Bishop of Berkeley, California, then later was sent to New England, and then returned to Texas as the OCA Bishop of the South. And when I think of that kind of a circuit, it reminded me of the life of St. John Maximovich, St. John of San Francisco, who was a Serbian and was in China and the Philippines, came to the United States, was sent to Europe, was in Belgium, I think, for a while, came back to the United States. And there's this sense of universality in St. John Maximovich, where his episcopacy was really over the entire world. And there's a model or an image of that in Archbishop Dmitri, who served all over the United States from coast to coast. So he really is an American Orthodox bishop, I think, very broadly. I was also told he loved the Greek service, but he had a lifelong friend who was a Jewish rabbi who told him he needed to go to, I believe, St. Mary's Russian church in Minneapolis. And he went there and he heard the liturgy in English for the first time. And he fell in love with it. He fell in love with the Russian tones. He fell in love with the liturgy in English. And so he always strove to incorporate English language with the Byzantine that he was familiar with and bring in as much Russian choral as he could. And so he did end up serving in the OCA as it was taking shape over the last century. And he was an important figure in it. But just like he traveled from coast to coast, he was also a pan-Orthodox figure in his own right, understanding the ethos of the Russians and the Greeks, the Serbians and other people that he served. So stories surrounding his humility and his humor and his holiness were endless. Some of them people talking so fast I couldn't write them all down, which I thought was wonderful. But here are a few of these stories, these anecdotes that were told to me by people who knew the Archbishop personally. These were things that they remembered in their conversations with him. And the first that I put here, because the fellow that this happened to later became a priest, but he and his wife were young converts. They were going to the St. Seraphim Cathedral in Dallas, and they lived near the cathedral, and they had just had their first child. And this was a few decades back, still the age of landlines. And so this young man gets a telephone call, and the voice on the other end says, "Hi, this is your neighbor. I heard you just had a baby. I've baked you a cake, and I want to bring it over." And so this fellow was like, "Sure, oh, okay, that's very neighborly of you." Well, it was the Archbishop Dmitri. Didn't say who he was. He didn't say, "This is your Archbishop." He just wanted to do something nice for a recent convert and a young family, and baked him a cake. And everybody said he was an incredible cook, so it was probably a really good cake. But he was constantly involved in doing things for other people, constantly giving his money and his possessions away. I saw the house that he lived in occasionally. It was a shack. It was very run down. It was a little house near the cathedral. He poured all of his money into building the cathedral and supporting the members of his parish, didn't save anything for himself. And the little house that he lived in was structurally sound, but people said that everyone was afraid that if too many people gathered on the second floor that it might collapse, because apparently it was a little bit shaky. I don't know if that actually happened or if that was just somebody exaggerating, but that's what I was told. He was known for rarely sleeping and staying up in prayer and being available to people by phone or by visitors at all times of day and night. He never married, of course, became a bishop, but the testimony about him is not just that he didn't marry, but that he really seemed to have this beautiful aura of virginity and purity about him, where he was approachable by all people at all times and had this childlike innocence. He and his sister lived together or near each other most of their lives. She didn't marry either. I think she ran a Greek restaurant. That's what somebody told me. I'm just now remembering. And they both spent time serving the community, feeding the poor, being available to the people that came. And they said, everyone told me that they had just this really beautiful childlike relationship with each other, but that was also very, very practical. The anecdote that I really liked was when Archbishop Dmitri was raised to the episcopal throne and became a bishop, he came home to the little shack where he and his sister were living with the other people that they were taking care of. And she said, well, how was it? How was the enthronement? And he said, well, I got a new hat. And she said, yes, but you still have to take out the trash. That was the kind of simplicity that they lived in. There are a lot of stories online. One of the ones that interested me was Rod Dreher, who many of you know, journalist. He converted to Orthodoxy a few years back, and he was going to the St. Seraphim Cathedral, and he talks about in his blog the invitation that he got to go to the Archbishop's house after liturgy one Sunday, and he said in that reflection that he was very nervous about it. He thought, an Archbishop's house, you have to mind your manners, everything's going to be kind of opulent and ridiculous, and he wasn't prepared for the shack that was next door to the cathedral and all of the people packed into it and all of the children running around everywhere, and Archbishop Dmitri just sitting in a corner and talking to anybody that would come by. And Rod Dreher mentions in there how important that was to him at a very difficult time in his life, that he was a figure who was living out the gospel commands and the description of a bishop that's listed in Paul's writings, how they should be humble, how they should take care of the poor. Archbishop Dmitri had this habit, they said, of patting children on the head. And whenever he would leave liturgy, he would always walk past and pat all the children on the head and give them a blessing. And that becomes important at another story later, but that was another thing that people said, that children flocked to him all the time. If you remember him from serving here at the cathedral, he's very tall. I mean, very tall, thin man. And little kids would mistake him for Gandalf because that's what, the giant beard and the long nose, he just kind of had this presence, and they just loved him, and they said, it's Gandalf. And I think that delighted him. Another priest mentioned to me that he was, when he was considering priesthood, he went to Archbishop Dmitri and he said, I don't know if this is my vocation, but I think I'm being called to the priesthood. And he was told, only become a priest if, like Christ, you can look on people and love them. That's the story in the gospel where people came to Christ, and it says he looked on them and he loved them. And Archbishop Dimitri's advice to anyone wanting to become a priest was, don't do it unless you can look at the people and love them. I think there are many priests who feel called, but they get caught up in the difficulties of being a priest, and they forget their primary vocation is to love and care for the people. And that's something that I think Archbishop Dmitri never lost sight of in his own life. Interestingly, he was one of the candidates to become a metropolitan of the OCA in the 1970s. And among the people that voted against him, or I'm not sure how the vote worked, I didn't look into that very deeply, but one of the people that said, no, you shouldn't do this, was Alexander Schmemann. And I asked, I said, why did Alexander Schmemann say that Archbishop Dmitri, why did he vote against him or say that he shouldn't become a bishop? And Alexander Schmemann said to the soon-to-be Archbishop Dmitri, America is not ready for a convert bishop. You go back to Texas and become a saint. And that was, I think, a prophetic word.